Well, let's talk now to Sinan Ciddi, who's non-resident senior fellow on Turkey at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Sinan, thank you for being with us. So 5 more years for President Erdogan. What's your assessment of what he will do with those 5 years?
Well, I mean, he gave some of these clues last night in both his election victory rallies, one in Istanbul and one in Ankara. It sounds to me that he's going to pretty much continue doing a lot of the same thing, which is essentially polarizing the country internally, playing upon some of those sore spot divisions, such as the country's sort of, fixation on anti-LGBTQ issues, dig down on sort of Kurdish sort of identities, and basically use that nationalist wave to sort of consolidate his power base domestically. On the foreign policy side, we're not necessarily sure what's going to happen at this point, but we do know that he's interested in essentially turning a fresh leaf with some regional countries, as well as the United States and Europe to an extent. Whether he can do that very much depends on his preferences going forward. We do know that Turkey's economy is in a terrible state, and right now it is facing a massive balance of payments crisis, which means that the close to $700 billion of external and internal debt all told will need to be serviced or Turkey faces default, which means he's going to essentially have to return to some sort of economic orthodoxy or introduce some sort of capital controls, because what he's doing up until now, the elections, is unsustainable.
Yes, and that's the interesting part here, isn't it? He might be sowing division at home, straight out of the playbook of other world leaders that builds them power in their base, but he will need to look internationally for help on the economy, and that will require a certain degree of compromise, won't it?
It does, but last night he also mentioned in his victory speech in Ankara, he suggested that knocking on the door of international institutions such as the IMF is not necessarily what he's interested in. What he's more likely to do is approach some of Turkey's emerging partners in the Gulf, in the Middle East, such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, as well as Qatar, for immediate financing, which I don't think is necessarily sustainable going in, in the long term. I'm no economist, but he'd rather do that and essentially then face the sort of open the books approach of the IMF, and it's also likely to poll unpopularly at his level. But compromise is necessary because Turkey is also interested in things like acquiring new defense sort of capabilities from the United States, such as new fighter jets. But it can't do that because there are lots of objections here in Washington, in Congress, against Turkey's sort of belligerent and sort of antagonistic stance towards other NATO partners and allies. And also, Turkey is still withholding the membership of NATO, prospective ally Sweden. So all of these are on the table. So if Erdogan's going to have any chance of sort of engaging in this sort of a performance-based growth that will benefit all Turkish voters, that sees the economy grow, then he's going to have to ameliorate, and he's going to essentially have to build bridges with international partners and allies rather than going at it alone.
Yes, and previously he's been seen as a mediator. He's want to place Turkey as a mediator in world affairs, one that would bring together both sides. But you're right, that EU issue, as far as Sweden's accession to NATO is concerned, could be seen as resetting ties with Washington, could it not, if Turkey approves that accession?
It would certainly be welcome in Washington, but there are so many outstanding issues. There is a long shopping list of issues. I mean, if you look at the countries that initially or regimes that initially congratulated Erdogan first upon his victory last night, you'll see some of where these fault lines lie. For example, one of the first parties to congratulate him was Hamas, based in Lebanon, followed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Before Western capitals such as Washington and Brussels sort of issued their congratulations. And that basically speaks to the heart of all these disagreements that Turkey has with the West. For example, Turkey still maintains weapon systems that it acquired from the Russian Federation back in 2019, which is an anathema to NATO and the United States and Europe, because the West cannot really tell where Turkey stands in the world. And where Erdogan stands is basically is hedging, right, between what he sees as a sort of declining West and an ascendant sort of China and Russia, and he's trying to sort of position himself between that. But given that, what you suggested, as a bridge builder or an ameliorator, he hasn't really been in a sort of bridge building sort of role since the early 2010s. He's been very antagonistic, very toxic towards his traditional partners and allies. The only question I have right now is, will he be able to essentially move past that? But I don't necessarily see a lot of hope going forward.
It's really good to talk to you. Thank you for your insight there. That's Sinan Ciddi, non-resident senior fellow on Turkey at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Grateful for your time. Thank you.